more than twice everything it produces in an entire year. It is the biggest pile of government debt in the developed world. For 30 years, that was somehow completely fine. In 2026, it is starting not to be. And if it goes wrong, the shockwave won't stay in that one country. It could hit markets all over the world, including the money in your own retirement account. The country isn't some poor, unstable economy. It's Japan. Today, we follow the money into the strangest debt story on Earth. Let's start with a number that shouldn't make sense. Japan is one of the largest, most advanced economies on the planet, and its government debt is worth more than 2.5 times the size of its entire economy, over 250% of GDP. That is by far the highest in the rich world. Now, if you watched our video on Argentina, your alarm bells should be ringing. Argentina collapsed again and again with far less debt than this. So by that logic, Japan should have imploded decades ago. Instead, it stayed calm, stable, and orderly the entire time. How? The answer is that Japan isn't Argentina's twin. It's Argentina's mirror image. Where Argentina suffered from too much inflation, Japan suffered from the exact opposite problem, too little. Here's how it began. Around 1990, Japan's enormous stock and property bubble burst spectacularly, and instead of bouncing back, the country sank into something rich nations rarely experience: deflation. Prices stopped rising and started slowly falling. Growth flatlined. The population began aging and shrinking. Now, falling prices might sound wonderful. Cheaper everything, right? But deflation is a quiet trap. If people expect things to be cheaper next month, they put off spending today. Businesses see weak demand, so they stop investing and hiring. The whole economy freezes into a slow, grinding stagnation. Japan was stuck there for decades, so to fight it, the Bank of Japan reached for a radical tool and then never let go of it. It cut interest rates all the way to zero. Then, incredibly, below zero, and it printed staggering amounts of money to buy up the government's own debt. In short, it made money essentially free. And this is the key to the whole puzzle. When borrowing costs almost nothing, a government can pile up almost unlimited debt without it hurting. Japan's politicians borrowed astronomical sums to prop up the economy, building that mountain of debt, but the interest bill stayed tiny because rates were near zero. You can carry almost any debt if the interest is basically free. There was one more secret ingredient. Unlike Argentina, which borrowed heavily from foreigners, Japan mostly owes the money to itself. Its own citizens and its own central bank hold the vast majority of that debt. They're patient, loyal lenders who don't panic and flee. That's why Japan never had a sudden, violent crisis. It just had a long, stable stagnation. For 30 years, this uneasy balance held. And then, in 2026, it started to break. Because after decades of trying and failing, inflation finally came back to Japan, driven by global price shocks and a weakening currency. And that forced the Bank of Japan to do the one thing it had avoided for a generation: raise interest rates. It has now lifted them to 1%, the highest level since 1995. And I know that sounds almost laughably small, but remember the size of that debt. On the biggest debt pile in the developed world, even a tiny rise in interest rates means a rapidly growing share of the entire government budget gets swallowed just to pay the interest. The one thing that made all that debt survivable, free money, is now disappearing. The trap is finally springing shut. And at the same time, the second problem is tightening the vice, the yen. Because Japan's interest rates are still far below America's, 1%, versus around 3.5%, money naturally flows out of the yen and toward those higher returns elsewhere. That has crushed the value of the yen to a 40-year low, around 163 to the dollar. And a weak yen makes everything Japan imports, its energy, its food, more expensive, which fuels even more inflation, which pressures the central bank to raise rates even faster, which makes the debt problem even worse. Japan is now trapped between two bad options: raise rates to defend the yen and fight inflation, and slowly choke on its own debt, or keep rates low and let the yen keep collapsing. There is no painless way out. But here's the part that reaches all the way to you, wherever you live. because Japan's problem is about to become the world's problem through something called the carry trade. For years, since you could borrow Japanese yen for almost nothing, investors all over the planet did exactly that. They borrowed cheap yen and used it to buy higher returning assets everywhere else. American stocks, bonds, real estate, you name it. This carry trade quietly grew into one of the biggest and most important trades in all of global finance. Trillions of dollars rest on it. But here's the danger. When Japan raises its rates and the yen suddenly strengthens, that entire trade goes into reverse. Investors are forced to scramble, buying back yen and dumping everything else all at once as fast as they can. And that is exactly what happened in August 2024. A single modest move by the Bank of Japan triggered a violent global market sell-off in a matter of days. Stocks around the world plunged. Let that sink in. The interest rate decisions of one central bank on one set of islands can send shockwaves crashing through markets across the entire planet, including the pension funds and index funds that hold your savings. Japan is no longer a quiet, faraway story. It's wired directly into the global financial system, and that points to the biggest lesson of all. Japan is the ultimate test of a question that every heavily indebted country, including the United States, is quietly, nervously watching. Can a government really run enormous debts forever as long as the borrowing stays cheap? And what happens when it finally stops being cheap? Argentina showed us the fast, violent version of a debt reckoning. Japan may be showing us the slow, creeping one, and testing whether the developed world's long era of easy money is finally coming due. So the world's biggest debt bomb isn't ticking away in some poor or chaotic nation. It's sitting quietly inside one of the richest, most orderly countries on Earth. Watch three things: how quickly the Bank of Japan raises rates, where the yen goes next, and whether that giant carry trade unwinds all over again. Because when Japan's 30-year experiment finally ends, the whole world is going to feel it. If this made the news make more sense, that is exactly what this channel is for. The money story behind the headlines. Subscribe and we'll break down the next one together.